Hello all, I'm Tim Slocum and I welcome you to tonight's presentation of the Cheshire Land Trust. This is the first in a series of programs we hope to deliver to the public to help you engage in what we do as a nonprofit organization in Cheshire, to learn a little bit more about our properties in town, about our goals and objectives for being an organization, and for you as a citizen of Cheshire and possibly being a member of the Land Trust, using our properties for their intended purpose. So with me tonight, I'm joined by David Shrum. David is the treasurer of the Land Trust. I believe, Dave, you've been on our governing board since 1992, I think.
87.
87, he corrected me, as he often may. I did beat him to the punch. I've been on the board since 1982. We are joined on that governing board, Dave, by other members. There's 12 of us that are on that body, 9 that are rotating directors with an officer corps, including a president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. With that, I'm going to turn to Dave and ask Dave to give us a little bit of an explanation of what a land trust is, particularly the Cheshire Land Trust. We had our origins back in 1969. Dave wasn't there, but he's read all about it. So give us a little background, Dave.
It's very interesting. The land trust movement got going in the United States back in a big way back in the 1960s when the suburbs were growing. People were moving out of the cities in the 50s and out into suburbs like Cheshire, and people felt the pressure on the land, all the developments going up, and that's where really the land trust movement got its genesis. In Cheshire, interestingly enough, I have here a historical artifact. This is a tape recording of the exploratory meeting, the first meeting of the Cheshire Land Trust, March 26, 1969. It's an old reel-to-reel tape, and it was done by Herb Cran, who was one of the founding members. And I believe the meeting was in the living room of Lee Pells, who many people in town know, was very active in the community. And it's very interesting to listen to this and talk about the things that they were concerned about and, you know, how do you go about setting up a land trust. Less than 3 weeks later, that very small group started collecting dues, and this is another little artifact that we have. This is the original ledger book put together by Joe Kowalski, who many people remember in town. They started collecting dues of $5 each. People like Tom Poole, Ray Beard, Lee Pells, Dave Eckerson, Sock Mahalikos, a lot of names in here that people who have been longtime residents would recognize. By the end of the year, they had collected $200 in dues, and they were off and running. And that's how the Cheshire Land Trust got started. We now have we have almost 600 acres of land,
yep,
and a lot more than $200 in the bank. But essentially, the Land Trust was started to receive property through gift, through easement, or by purchase, and hold it as open space.
Right.
And that's the primary thing. And I believe, Tim, you know about the first piece of land that we got, which was...
I do. And I think one distinguishing feature that we're always trying to bring across to the public is that we are a nonprofit that's in Cheshire, but we're not actually associated with town government. Our properties are actually governed by a board of directors and dues-paying members that really support our organization. And one of the guiding principles behind this, Dave has explained, but it was really important to have something to show for the organization's start. And a donor named Helen Russell donated 40 acres, which is really the linchpin of a larger acquisition of property along the entire ridgetop we know as Prospect Ridge. She donated the 40 acres, and with that, we really had something to talk about. So that early type of donation was critical, I think, to our start. It meant a lot more than the $230. It was goodwill. It was her statement that I'm giving something we own to you. And that was really material to our early success. That's sort of the name of that game. Dave, I think you probably recall, because we deal with it, a lot of the successive properties we received were oriented towards local development in Cheshire.
Right.
And you could speak to that.
Yeah, and that's a change that how things happen. And again, this is not just unique to Cheshire, but to other land trusts. It was not unusual back in our early days, which would have been in the late 60s, early 70s, that a developer would have remainder land, just land that they couldn't build on, too swampy, steep slopes. So in our early days, we accepted just about any piece of land that somebody wanted to give us. And if you look at some of our parcels, they look like a snake. You know, they snake around back through swamplands, around developments and so forth. And we were happy to get it because they were donations, they were free. A lot of the parcels weren't terribly large, but if you look at our property map on our website, you look at these little parcels here and little parcels there and say, well, why did you do that? Well, we did it because they were free. We have since learned that we've got to be a little more careful about what we accept, because a major part of our challenge is keeping track of these properties, maintaining them, and so we're a little more careful about how we we acquire land. But going back to what you said, Tim, about how we are separate from the town, we do try to cooperate with the town in trying to put together pieces of property here, abutting another piece of property here. It doesn't make a lot of sense to just have a little acre here, a little acre there. It makes sense to have green belts if you possibly can. And if you look at a map of the town where some of our green belts are, particularly Prospect Ridge, which is where our first parcel was, the town has purchased a lot of land along Prospect Ridge. That's one of the green belts. We have some other pieces of land on Prospect Ridge. We have some pieces of land in East Cheshire. The town has some land in East Cheshire. And between the two organizations, we're cobbling together some pretty big pieces of property.
Pretty big, substantial
so
green belts.
We cooperate with each other. But we are a separate 501c3, totally supported by members of the public.
By members, that's true. Another very interesting piece, I think, that really got the Land Trust started and mobilized public support for what we did was the acquisition of Roaring Brook. And I can bring you back to 1974 when I was in high school, actually. And at the time, Cheshire's very first subdivision with an open space component was being suggested in Cheshire. And that acquisition was impacting a property that very few people knew about. But it was a mountain road property that you drive past. The house was buried deep on a mountainside, and within that cavernous property was a ravine that contained Cheshire's Roaring Brook, which is the state's highest single-drop waterfall, a very significant feature. Getting wind of that was going to be sold put some people on their heels and very concerned about it. And that movement itself, which involved Tom Poole, only 5-6 years after this was an organization accepting land, really broadened interest in the Land Trust. And what happened out of that acquisition was, number one, the Land Trust was able to come up with a trust. In fact, it was my father-in-law, who was a banker at the time, who whispered in my ear, and he said, the Dudley Seymour Trust, we manage that down at Second New Haven Bank. They may be able to help the town out. So we passed that along through Tom Poole. The town got involved, got some interest. There was petitions. There was all kinds of stuff that was being
the Land Trust organized
put together.
A hike
we organized a hike, a tour. It was just a very interesting time. And what was very interesting also about it was we got the ear of the developer who saw the benefit in a lot of this. The bottom line is they wanted a development with small lots, higher density, and they were willing to trade off a substantial piece of this, but they did want to get paid for it. So cobbling together the finances was very difficult for a town that never even considered acquiring open space. I don't even know what the town's budget was at the time.
The town had, back in those days, virtually nothing to acquire open space. It was the 70s. It was a tough economy, high inflation. Nobody was interested in the town buying open space. But that's we get a question a lot. You mentioned Roaring Brook. We get a question a lot. Where can I hike? Where can I go in Cheshire? That Roaring Brook parcel is probably one of the best kept secrets. There are people who have lived in town for years. They know nothing about Roaring Brook. I would again suggest the town's website, our website. Go hike Roaring Brook. It's a real local treasure.
It's a wonderful site, and actually what it created when it was ultimately acquired by the town and the state it was a combination of different entities, including the land trust, which had a 25-year easement on about 10 acres, which included the house. And that was largely so that the donor could live in the house for a period of time. That easement has lapsed, and the Cheshire Land Trust only has heartstring connections to that whole property, although we get accolades for protecting it, as I believe we should. But what's very interesting about that piece for me, Dave, is that you've got Russell, you've got Roaring Brook, you've got the parcels in the 90s that were purchased in between, Nettleton's Ravine, which is a very beautiful ravine, which has a brook running through it, Sanford Brook, I believe. And that Naugatuck State Forest, which is the state, obviously. And then in the 90s, we had the town acquiring hundreds of acres. And that was at a time when the Land Trust really couldn't assist, but I think helped create an interest in that.
The town picked up the Fred Benz property. Opposite Cornwall. So we don't have all of that ridge, but when you stand at Bartlam Park or you stand off and you look at that ridge, our western wall, if you will,
yes.
Between the Land Trust and the town, that is almost all protected now against development. And people have often said, well, what are you buying that rock pile for? You drive along Mountain Road and you look at the steep slope and you say, what good is it? If you go up on top, up on the Prospect side, it's not a steep slope.
Right.
And that ridge could have become what Avon Mountain became, unfortunately, with a bunch of McMansions along the top with their floodlights all night long, which would have really ruined that ridge line. It's almost all protected, again, between the town and the Land Trust. But Tim, you mentioned easements.
Yes.
You might want to talk about that a little
bit.
bit.
Yeah, easements have become, well, an easement has become essentially probably a very important tool for a donor who doesn't want to give up their ownership rights to their property, but they do have an interest in its life preservation. So past their ownership, they want to pass along that property's conservation. And some of our more significant properties that are under easement today would be the McKee property on South Brooksvale Road. Waldo McKee was an original member.
Yeah.
His daughter Jean and sister and cousin donated, it's almost 50 acres that were eased over a period of several years to the Land Trust as an additional protection on their property so that they hope to be able to maintain its agriculture heritage. It is now today the oldest continuously operated farm in the state of Connecticut.
Now you might want to tell people where that is, just in case they don't know.
It is on South Brooksvale Road. It's a very important view that one can experience driving around that sharp corner by the stone house.
Right.
Then there's that long, historic-looking, well, I guess you'd call it a mansion in its time. It's not a mansion compared to some other homes, but it's probably the most stately home in town, with an incredible view. You should look at it on our website. It's really an interesting piece of property. And so that's an important conservation restriction that we have. And what that means for the Land Trust, and I think this is at the heart of what we have to do, this is an added layer of responsibility for the Land Trust. Because it's one thing to have an easement. It's another thing to defend the easement if a future owner changes their mind about what was the intent of that.
And that's because, and again, a lot of people don't understand. They think, well, the easement just lasts as long as the original owners are alive. But it doesn't. It stays with the land. It stays on the deed. And every successor owner is bound by what the original owner put on there. And that's a major one. We have easements on the Leavenworth Farm. We have an easement on Dr. Giddings' property.
That's true.
Out on Boulder Knoll. So it's a way of preserving land. And if anybody's out there listening to us that might want to do that, it's a way of keeping the land, but keeping it
and there are
open.
Implications for the donor tax-wise. It may help them. I'd like to segue now into public access to our properties, what those properties are generally intended for, because there are varying intentions of use for the properties. As Dave earlier mentioned, a lot of our properties are wetland preserves. At the base of Prospect Ridge is a massive wetland system, which is very important to have protected those uplands there. Most people don't want to traipse through swamps we don't encourage it. We're not doing the swamps a service either. But we do have some fantastic properties where we've managed and developed trails. Of noteworthy mention would be the Brook Preserve, which is on Sperry Road. Not too far from that is Fresh Meadows, another important neighborhood-supported and sponsored and donated gift to the Land Trust. And these have active trails. We manage and maintain. We encourage public use of those properties. And we make that known to the public through our email blasts and things of that nature. And those are significant uses of our property, as well as the Blue Trail hikes that take place that are not on Land Trust property, but they connect with Land Trust property. And then another piece of the mystery, I think, with the Land Trust too, Dave, to talk about. I know you're very familiar with the farming operations that go on with the Land Trust, which has sort of set us apart from what we used to be. Tell us a little bit about Ives Farm, Dave. I think it's probably our most significant acquisition in terms of public acknowledgement of wow. So go ahead, Dave.
Well, I remember the day vividly, Tim, and I think you do too. It was pouring down rain. It was one of those 100-year rainstorms. And it was the first week in July of 2006. And you called me from your store and said, "You won't believe this, but I just got a fax from Betty Ives' attorney giving the entire farm to the Cheshire Land Trust." And I almost died right there driving my car. It was an astounding gift. Betty died at age 95, I believe. She had a 164-acre farm out on Cheshire Street. She never told us, she never told anybody except her lawyer what she was going to do with that farm. And suddenly, we were now the proud owners of a very old farmhouse,
yes,
very old barns, crops in the field, sheds. And it's been a very, very interesting 9 years.
It has.
Of trying to manage that farm. We won't get into all the details involved in that, but that was without a doubt our largest gift. It probably was the largest piece of privately owned land left in Cheshire. It certainly would have been turned into residential. You probably were looking at 150, 170 houses out there because it was virtually all the property was buildable. So that was a huge, huge undertaking for us.
And needless to say, Dave, we've received a lot of new members who are so grateful to be in those neighborhoods around us. And the other thing that I think is critical about that piece is it's an active farm.
Right.
And that impacts public use of that property. Although it's a property, we want to make available when we can for public benefit. And of course, eating the crops off that property is certainly a public benefit, but we do host events at that property.
Right.
A couple of hikes we try and do in an organized fashion. The thing that surprised me, Dave, about that property, and I go back to its, the receiving of that property was, I really had no sense. I talked to Betty Ives once or twice about the farm, but I always assumed the farm was just what you saw with the crops on it. Many more acres of that property is forested, and it is a fantastic piece of forest. Tell us a little bit about the trails there, Dave.
Well, it's actually two pieces of property, and we have a very nice aerial shot that I think we'll be able to work in here of a drone shot of the property looking up to the east, up on the hill across Cheshire Street, and then we have another shot looking down along the Quinnipiac River. And people drive along Cheshire Street, and unless you really know the topography of Cheshire, you don't realize that just down the hill over those meadows is the Quinnipiac River. But Lee Pells, who again was one of the founding members, she gave 14 acres of her farm to us. She was friends with Betty. I think Betty noticed the way the Land Trust handled that. Lee was always after Betty, hey, these people are okay, they're legitimate, they'll treat your land well. And so that probably had an influence on Betty. But you're right, the fields that you see driving down Cheshire Street, which are all green now with cover crop but are very soon to be planted, is about 45 to 50 acres of the 164 acres. The rest of the land is up the hill to the east, and it goes all the way back through the woods, basically just about to the Meriden town line. And there are trails that have been developed through that area, and we encourage people to to use them. There's a couple of different access points, but we have an event, what's become an annual event, a day on the farm in September, and I believe this year it's coming up on September 19th.
Yep.
We built a new barn a couple of years ago to be a like a focal point or a place where we could have meetings and have events, and we encourage people to come out. And most people that come out and come up to the new barn there and then look down on the fields and out over the Quinnipiac River, they say, we had no idea this was all here, because you can't see it. You can't see it from Cheshire Street. You can see the old house and the old barns. But people may not realize it, but the produce that comes off of that farm gets, within 24 hours, gets shipped mostly off to Bizzuto's, and Bizzuto's ships it between Maryland and Maine.
Very
and
impressive.
So it's, you could be eating, if you're on vacation in Maine, you could be eating a zucchini that was raised in Cheshire.
It's
Can't guarantee that, but
it's kind of interesting with the farming too, the transition we've seen. When we first, for example, had the easement granted from the McKees, there was a farmer, Lassen, who had a dairy farm, and he would plant hay on that property,
Right.
basically. He'd cut that hay. Well, now that property has every form of crop on it. And it's interesting to see this evolution of farming in Cheshire. We're still doing the bedding plant capital of the world thing, but there's an awful lot of produce being grown on Cheshire land, and it's great. And I think the fact that the Cheshire Land Trust is connected to some of it is a powerful thing. Yeah. We're not farmers. We're not out there with our rakes and our hoes, and we're not turning the soil, but it's a satisfying thing, and I think our members should take note of that, really, because your member support is critical to this effort, and I think that'll help us. I'd like to move a little bit towards some of the activities we hope to do this year within the community. I know the show may air after this event has taken place, but you know we hosted an early walk in January. It turned out to be a beautiful day. It was New Year's Day walk of Fresh Meadows. Delightful snowfall hadn't started, and we saw bobcat, we saw deer. The 25 folks that turned out just had a great start of their year. We segue into May. We had a walk of Brook Preserve. We're looking at a hike of Roaring Brook. We have in June Connecticut Trails Day, which is celebrated across the state. The town of Cheshire will be hosting a walk somewhere. It escapes me right now. We'll be doing another walk at Fresh Meadows. As you started to allude to, there's the Stewardship Day coming up because we have to manage our property. Tell us about that activity, because we need that kind of help.
As we've grown, you can imagine, you know what it's like to maintain your own house. You may have a half-acre of land or an acre of land around your house, especially now with things starting to grow and the bushes have to be trimmed. Imagine being responsible for almost 600 acres, and we really, really, really need people who don't mind grabbing a chainsaw or a handsaw or a weed whacker or something and coming out to help clear our trails, to take care of things. We have trees that fall down out of our property, okay, that have to be going and cleaned up. The farm, we have a tremendous amount of work that still has to be done out there. So we need people who like the outdoors, who are willing to come out and volunteer. We really that's a place where we really have to put some emphasis, because trails, if you don't keep them clear, they close up. Mother Nature will reclaim herself very, very quickly if you don't keep after it. So we're looking for volunteers. We need donors for land. We need donors for money, dues, members. It just, I've been doing the books now for a while, but I go back and I look at $5 dues from a lot of people and what it turned into. But we need that ongoing support. And people say, well, your dues are $35 a year. You know what? What difference does that make? It makes a tremendous difference, because if we weren't here, Helen Russell wouldn't have given her 20 acres. Betty Ives would have no one to give 164 acres to. And
the next donor who's thinking about it wouldn't have a chance. There's another piece of this I wanted to bring into this. We have had some real renewed interest from some of the youth service clubs. And I think, to their credit, they've helped us with some of our efforts. We've been helped by Eagle Scout candidates with trail blazing and trail maintenance. And this is the sort of thing we encourage. Rick Marinero has sort of helped and led that effort in many ways.
A lot of Eagle
we have
Scouts.
a lot of Eagle
projects,
Scouts. Yeah. We have a tremendous resource in Joy Vanderlecht. She's new to our board. She's just been, I don't know how do you explain Joy? She's
a joy.
She's fireworks. She's a joy. That's a good answer. But Joy has mobilized a lot of people and a lot of attention to our properties, and this is the sort of thing that will help us grow as well. We do not want to be a quiet and secret organization. We're not. I don't want to mention the Masons, but we are here as an open and willing organization to accept your helping hands.
Yep.
This is sort of what we are and what we do, and we really hope, as our organization continues to grow, you're here to help us grow, and we reach out to the public for that each and every day, and here especially.
And again, our fundamental purpose is keeping open space open. So there may be another Betty Ives out there. There may be somebody who wants to protect their land. Call us, talk to us. We understand the pressure on the land. We understand that, people are trying to get 2 or 3 houses wedged into every single little piece of open land that's left out there, because a lot of big parcels are gone.
Yes.
But there are tax benefits, and I was talking to somebody the other day. There's nothing like when you approach the end of your life. What did I do? Well, if you give a big chunk of land, that's a piece of you that's going to be there forever.
Right.
So,
well, as we sort of wrap this up, I do want to mention our website once again. It is a source of information that's available. When I dig into what people do on the land trust, they basically spend some time there. There's a lot of information for potential donors. There's information on our properties. It's extremely important, I think, for us to continue to maintain that information so people can see what we've done. It lists donors, it lists the size, it lists public access. It gives you the information you need to know. We'll continue to encourage you to join our email list and accept our invitations to join us on walks and any activity that we get engaged in. CheshireLandTrust.org.
Doesn't get any easier
That's
than
right.
that.
And you can always call Tim Slocum. I'm in the book. Well, not really, but you can call me. And you can call Dave. You can call any of us. All our contact information is also on the website with email. So these are very important things. So I thank you for joining us tonight. It's been wonderful to be able to engage and talk about the Land Trust. Thank you, and good night.